Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
Having fled from her husband, she found employment in a wealthy household. However, when she overheard a conversation in a foreign language, she pretended not to understand. Jalil loved impeccable order in everything. Long ago, he and his wife had divided family duties by areas of responsibility. He rarely interfered with her decisions regarding the management of the house, and she kept out of the stable. His Arabian horses, his love, his pride, his soul, and heart, Jalil was utterly obsessed with them. Now, after a morning conversation with his wife about how the new maid turned out to be a worthless lazybones, Jalil hurried to his horses. He had no desire to get involved in women's quarrels. He was about to saddle Diadema, and they would head to the field. He was almost certain that this mare, with her rare silver coat not commonly found among purebred Arabs, was intelligent. From afar, she sensed her master. She began to flare her nostrils and shift her feet. Both loved freedom, space, and speed. Moreover, Diadema, belonging to the Kohela, Siglavi breed, could gallop while drinking in the wind and feeding on the scents of freshly cut grass. She was unique. The mare was slowly entering middle age. She recently celebrated her 10-year anniversary. How frightened her owner had been when small spots, like grains of cereal, appeared on her proud back. The veterinarian immediately reassured him upon being urgently summoned. "Your girl is maturing. She'll make an excellent mother. Moreover, she can continue to breed repeatedly. It's now time for her to acquire horse freckles. Soon, these marks will cover her entire body. But this should not alarm you. She will look even more interesting." Jalil approached the distant paddock, stroked Diadema between her ears. He looked into her intelligent eyes and gently whispered, "Hold on, my good girl. I've missed you too. Today, we'll ride far, to the railway station. We'll stretch our bones, warm up our muscles. Just a couple more minutes, and it will be just the two of us." Jalil took the reins from the groom, deftly leaped into the saddle, and was off. Only a trail of dust rose under the stomping of sturdy hooves. Unforgettable moments. A narrow path from the stable towards the field with meadow flowers, neatly trimmed posts of grass around, almost absolute silence. Only 4 kilometers to the railway halt if directly, not by the worn dirt road. About a kilometer to the nearest neighbor's farmstead. Amid this steppe splendor, it seemed they lived quite alone. Their country house was amusing, a slice of civilization in the countryside, with not a single wooden note in its architecture, resembling a mini-Eastern palace amid rural landscapes. Only shepherds and shepherdesses were missing for the complete picture. Among Jalil and Samia's relatives were many representatives of different nationalities. It just happened that way. As a result, by their 50s, they were happy parents of 3 sons and 1 daughter of quite exotic appearance. The only commonality was that at first glance, it was clear that the entire family belonged to one of the Eastern peoples. Jalil joked, "Oh, wife, if passports still contained a column for nationality, I would be hard-pressed to say which blood runs strongest in you, me, or our children." Both of their ancestors had moved from their homelands quite some time ago. In their clans, they might have strictly adhered to somewhat chaotically chosen traditions and rituals characteristic of various nations. They themselves considered paramount that they ended up together out of love, not by their parents' choice. They continued the work of their fathers and grandfathers in livestock breeding, expanded their farms, and turned them into several private farming enterprises now employing hired workers. Jalil and Samia met at a university of national economy. Though it didn't exactly produce ready livestock breeders, it diligently taught students economics and jurisprudence. Both had known how to raise livestock since childhood. Now, the challenge before them was how to manage a farm, from feeds and pastures to processing into meat products. Jalil was an excellent specialist in his field. They met at an educational conference, became friends, and started dating. The older generation did not obstruct their love. Somehow, everything went smoothly from the very beginning. A harmonious wedding, the birth of children, Samia's voluntary career abandonment to raise the children. They barely noticed how they quickly reached the silver anniversary of their marriage, and then the honorable status of 30 years together. Other families could write whole multi-volume novels describing their lives. Jalil and Samia's shared path could be depicted with just a few verbs: did, achieved, reached, succeeded, adding only one word: happy. Now Jalil hurried to the field, inhaled the spicy scent of various herbs, and thought once again that he had no right to complain about fate. All was calm at home, where coziness and serenity reigned. At the end of August, a grand event was planned. Their only daughter Agol was getting married. After the daughter's marriage, the only child without a wedding ring would be their eldest son, Kareem. The family often teased their 27-year-old firstborn, noting that even his younger brothers had found wives and started families, while he was still searching for his princess. Soon, they would marry him off themselves, to the first one who knocked on their door. Teresa ran with all her might, covering her tracks. If her husband found the runaway, he would beat her again, bruising and bloodily marring her natural beauty. Daughter of a mulatto man who worked a lot at a joint venture and a Caucasian woman. She had inherited her father's dark-skinned charms along with his genes. When her father's contract finally ended, he was called back to his homeland in Zimbabwe. Teresa's mother left with him, entrusting her daughter to the care of her own mother. From there, it was all quite typical. The girl finished an elite gymnasium and enrolled in a university foreign languages faculty. Languages always came easily to her, naturally. In Teresa's linguistic treasure chest were two real gems: Shona, characteristic of her father's homeland. She grew up on words from his lexicon. The second exotic language was Miao, coming to the civilized world from China, Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. Teresa couldn't explain why she decided to master these two languages perfectly, but she always remembered what her mother taught her. Teresa, we never know what knowledge and skills might come in handy in life. Look at my mother, a brilliant English teacher. She taught me from an early age. That turned out to be decisive in my fate. I met your father. We could communicate freely, realized we were two halves of a whole, though born on different continents. You are the fruit of our common love, all inevitably. Teresa's grandmother also took part in teaching her beloved granddaughter. She introduced her to rare specialists in Shona and Miao languages. She supported her desires to master this unusual science of communication thoroughly. She waited until her granddaughter graduated, helped her get a job at a department. Teresa couldn't yet move to her parents in South Africa, and later, she didn't want to. She met Andre. He was a graduate student in their department, but he didn't resemble the stereotypical nerd buried in textbooks. Outwardly, he was muscular and sporty, more like a fan of some type of martial arts from the East. He was strong and agile, like a predator on the hunt, like a leopard or tiger before a decisive leap. Teresa could never have imagined that this man was prone to narcissism. Yet, he admired himself in every reflective surface, seizing every opportunity. He asked the dusky-skinned girl out on a date right away. Her stunning appearance drove him wild. He didn't expect to be turned down. After the cafe, Teresa refused to go to his apartment, firmly stating, "I don't think that's what we should be doing tonight. I haven't had that experience yet, and I'm not secretive about it." Andre was utterly surprised by her response. Before this exotic girl, he had never faced rejection from any of his casual or serious girlfriends. The refusal only fueled his desire to win Teresa over at any cost. He was competitive and hated losing. The young man made inquiries at the university about the girl's family. She was a prize he had never claimed before. Repeated attempts with Teresa did not work. Colorful romantic dates, dining out, movies, exhibitions, theater visits, picnic trips with his friends. He invited his new crush everywhere he thought she might find interesting. Alas, all his attempts to get close after his efforts brought no tangible shifts. Teresa allowed him a goodbye kiss, but kept him at arm's length. Andre had never experienced such a thing. He was beginning to lose patience. The darkness that had lain dormant in his soul was surfacing more frequently. Around Teresa, he maintained his composure, then vented on one of the girls. Andre looked for different ways out of this unpleasant situation for him. He even thought about deceiving the girl, to lie and lure her into his apartment. There, he would use his physical strength. But he disliked all these schemes. Andre wanted Teresa to be with him voluntarily, out of her own desire. He started courting earnestly. He got to know her grandmother, the supposed beloved girl, thinking the fortress would fall faster if he attacked on two fronts. Several months passed, and the situation remained unchanged. If anyone could look into other people's souls, what was now happening inside Andre would have scared them. The man was furious. He should have backed off, walked away, since nothing was working in this strange romance with Teresa. But it was now impossible to stop him. He decided to marry the rebellious lady, and then, once they were together, to take out on her all the humiliations he felt, to punish her with pain, both emotional and physical, and turn her into an object, a submissive slave, a nobody. Teresa, naturally, suspected nothing of his sinister plans. Her grandmother was literally charmed by this handsome graduate student. She considered Andre a good match for a decent girl. Look how hard he tries to please his beloved. He'll take care of his wife and children all his life. She undoubtedly reported her conclusions to Teresa, and the girl gave in. Andre was pleasant to her. The attention of such a handsome and smart man was flattering. It was difficult for her to gauge her feelings for him. There was no repulsion or rejection. Whether what Andre aroused in her could be called love, she herself couldn't say. Andre courted her so enchantingly, looked into her eyes so devotedly, that Teresa decided she would marry him. Their wedding was beautiful, if only because they themselves were beautiful. Even the photographer clicked his tongue in pleasure when he first aimed his professional camera at them. He thought to himself that he would later post photos of this couple on his advertising page online. Such a pair would surely attract new clients. Andre had no relatives at the celebration. He claimed it was too far and too expensive for them to travel from the north. He and Teresa would later throw another feast in his hometown. From the bride's side, only the grandmother was present at the registration. Her parents from Africa also could not fly in. A few pairs of youth, mainly Andre's friends with wives or girlfriends, were basically all the guests. However, that didn't interfere with the general fun and mood. Teresa did not yet know that their first wedding night would turn into a complete nightmare for her. Jalil spurred on the mischievous diadema near the railway tracks. It was evening, and the sun was sinking to the ground over the fields. Few people had disembarked at the station. The owners of the local mansions mostly had cars. Only the summer residents trudged to their distant retreats. In the nearest village, some residents rented out their cottages for the summer. After stroking his beloved diadema, Jalil was about to head home. He still had things to do at the stable, and he was already missing his wife. But then he saw a strange figure. He initially thought she was walking like a drunk. Could such a young woman have already learned to hit the bottle? Unable to resist, he tied his horse to the railing and went to take a closer look at the stranger. Something in her behavior alarmed him. Something was off. As he approached, he was even more surprised. The woman was dusky-skinned, with a stunning mass of black curly hair and huge brown eyes. For a moment, he even thought she resembled some singer he had seen on the television screen. He thought to himself, her appearance is nothing like our women's. What wind has blown her here? The foreigner, as Jalil thought, looked up at him with frightened eyes, seemed about to say something, and suddenly fainted. Jalil had not expected such a turn of events. There was no one else on the platform, and dusk was settling over the fields. What to do? Where to find help? He didn't hesitate for long, picked up the stranger in his arms, carried her back to where he left diadema, and hoisted her onto the saddle. The woman murmured something in her unconscious state, but did not come to. It was a long trek home through the fields. Jalil decided against looking for the local paramedic. Having cared for livestock for so many years, he had acquired some veterinary skills. The woman's pulse was steady, her breathing regular. He assumed she was in a deep faint, and he was right. Teresa had passed out from constant extreme stress. Tired of suffering, she was completely drained. The stretch of a couple of 100 kilometers from the city, which she had managed to travel, was the maximum her money could afford. She had fled home, taking advantage of Andre's forgetfulness. Normally, he securely locked her in the apartment, but this time he had slipped up. Teresa was a well-educated person. Just a few weeks after the wedding, she realized that Andre was a true abuser at heart. He didn't inflict visible injuries, but was very rough, even on their first night, explaining, "I've waited too long for this moment to indulge in calf's tenderness. Now you're mine." Why the frown, baby? A wife must obey her husband in everything. Do you understand? He didn't beat her openly, just handled her too harshly. Bruises on her arms and legs from his touches didn't have time to fade. A reasonable person might wonder why Teresa kept silent, complained to no one. The answer was simple. Andre had frightened her so much that if she told anyone, including her grandmother, the elderly woman would suffer. He would ambush her in the evening and cripple her. Teresa believed him. If someone had asked Teresa about her life after marriage, she couldn't have spoken about it without tears. Andre was jealous, monitored her every move. He had persuaded her so effectively to quit her job before the wedding that she didn't dare disobey. How could she have suspected that her charming suitor could turn out to be a tyrant? Deprived of the chance to communicate with her grandmother, at work, at university, Teresa tried to invite her only local relative to her place. Andre cut off her oxygen in that regard too. He dutifully and nobly escorted his wife into society, visiting her grandmother with a bouquet of flowers and a cake. Teresa dared not even hint to the elderly woman about her dire moral and physical condition as Andre's wife. During the brief hours at her grandmother's, her husband turned back into the old kind-hearted man, all warmth and soul. Teresa's grandmother melted again, overjoyed that her granddaughter had such a wonderful husband. Elsewhere, paths were nearly closed for Teresa. There was no more talk of the department or restaurants, trips out of town with friends ended, and there was no money left for theater tickets, concerts, or even the cinema. Her world had closed in. All communication with the outside world for the young wife was now limited to Andre. No one would believe that their apartment lacked internet access, and Teresa's cell phone was locked away in a cabinet. Andre reveled in revenge for Teresa's behavior before the wedding and enjoyed it. The woman patiently planned her escape, for which she was ready to give even her life. That morning, Andre was somewhat distracted. He pointed out to Teresa that she had slightly burnt the cheese pancakes at breakfast. He was dissatisfied that a stain hadn't completely washed out of his jeans, but he mentioned it listlessly, in passing. Before, he would have surely scolded his wife. The young woman was by no means unskilled, she cooked excellently and managed the household well. Her mother and grandmother had taught her everything, and she was quite capable. Little did she know that her husband had recently taken a mistress, a capricious beauty spoiled to the limit. She was so greedy for various trinkets, clothes, and jewelry that Andre was forced to take out a quick loan. It didn't help. The greedy creature swiftly devoured his offering and was now blackmailing him with threats of separation. Moreover, she proved to be so strong-willed that none of Andre's attempts to educate her had any effect. She laughed in his face and said, "You picked the wrong one, dear. I'll cage you yet and make you obey." It seemed like a joke, but Andre felt in his gut, this wasn't Teresa. No submissive sheep here. He would have left her long ago, but he had never had it so good with anyone else. Creditors caught up with him yesterday at home. They reminded him that he had missed another payment. They informed him that his account was now on a different scale. The interest on the loan would accumulate daily. Andre racked his brains on how to wriggle out of this situation. Right now, he was utterly fed up with Teresa, who he had toyed with like a cat with a mouse. Neither she nor her grandmother had anything worth taking. There was definitely no way to solve his problem here. Why on earth did he marry her? It was a mistake. It was then that Teresa noticed that Andre, as usual, had not locked the front door from the outside. She did not hesitate for long. A light bag with a minimum of essentials, documents, the most necessary women's trifles. She prayed to all the gods at once. Lord, please let me get away from here. I won't get another chance. She darted out of the building like a shadow. She met no neighbors she knew and took it as a good sign. At first, she wanted to rush to her grandmother's protective wing, but she quickly realized her husband would find her there instantly. She had no friends left. Andre had driven them all away while they were still dating. Her parents were too far away. There was no sense in upsetting them prematurely. It was fortunate that Andre hadn't thought to hide her passport, diplomas, and other important papers concerning her identity. But he was so cunning and sly that she couldn't afford to let her guard down for a second. She must not tell anyone the truth about herself. She would hide her wedding ring now. Regarding the stamp in her passport, if she had to show it somewhere, she would say she had been separated from her husband for a long time. Her mind was racing. I really shouldn't flash my passport anywhere. Andre could quickly find me if he starts actively looking. The best option would be to find a job, even if it's not in my field. If I want to cover my tracks, the best solution is somewhere far from my hometown, in a remote rural area. Teresa still didn't know how she would live going forward, how she could divorce the man she despised. It seemed to her that she could never trust another man again. How sweetly Andre had spoken to her, how soulfully he had courted her, and what it had all turned into. Is it really impossible to trust anyone in this world? How she ended up at the railway station, she could hardly remember. She had been in such fear for so long that now she flinched at any man who even slightly resembled Andre. She had almost no money. Her cruel husband had a clear way of assigning household duties into male and female roles. Yet, he bore no responsibility himself. He kept Teresa on a financial leash. He loved to taunt her about how she would be a needy nobody without him. All she had managed to scrape together over these months were the small change from shopping, which he disdainfully tossed into her pockets. She found her documents in the apartment, but the bank card, onto which her grandmother and parents had transferred money for the wedding, had vanished without a trace. Where was she to know that this gift from the older generation had long been spent by Andre on gifts for his mistress? At the ticket office, she found she only had enough for a commuter train ticket. The village that appeared on the display was unknown to her, but she had no choice. After buying the ticket, she was painfully hungry, but only had 2 rubles left in her pocket. There was something in Teresa's eyes that later on the train, an old man, sighing heavily, handed her a large rosy apple. "Eat, dear, you look pale. How are you feeling? You aren't pregnant, are you?" Teresa recoiled from the kind-hearted neighbor. The mere thought that she could be pregnant terrified her. She loved children, but she certainly did not want to have a child by a monster. So she was very careful about that matter, taking precautions so diligently that she was absolutely calm about it now. To prevent the old man from harboring any further suspicions or asking unnecessary questions, she joked, "I was just run ragged at work today. Didn't even manage to grab lunch. The bosses were driving us hard. Thank you for the apple. It's very tasty." Satisfied with her response, the old man soon dozed off, resting his head on an inflatable pillow. And Teresa inwardly scolded herself. I need to be more careful. Not draw any more attention to myself. She didn't care what this unknown village would bring. What awaited her there, whether she could find work and shelter, the old man with the apple, noticing that she was hungry, was proof enough that the world was not devoid of kind people. She would find a place under the generous sun. Jalil was at a crossroads. Should he bring the unknown woman home or leave her for now in a small servant's house at the stable? Their encounter could hardly be called an acquaintance. Although he and his wife were very hospitable people, this was a different matter. How would his family react to such a gift with a dark-skinned woman? And it wasn't just about the poor woman's nationality. The troubling part was that she had not regained consciousness. Who was she? Where from? Why so exhausted? He decided to first sort things out at home, in a calm environment. Their younger sons lived with their families in separate houses. Only Kareem and Egil remained under the parental roof. Samia, his person, his choice would not seem strange to them. Together, they would come up with something. Jalil took another look at the poor soul he had picked up at the railway station. Excessive duskiness might have been a sign of intense tanning, as it was the peak of summer. Perhaps she had just returned from some resort, and everything in her life was fine, and here he was already assigning her to the lot of the unhappy and unsettled. The woman jerked, suddenly opened her eyes, and stared bewildered at the horse and Jalil. Where are you taking me? Jalil responded promptly, You fainted at the station. I couldn't help you there. What brought you to our village? Do you have relatives or acquaintances here? Why did you feel ill? Are you sick? Teresa tried to stem the flood of questions that crashed down on her. She attempted to sit up but couldn't. I am looking for work, which is why I ended up here, and I'm feeling much better now. It must have been exhaustion that knocked me out at the worst possible moment. I don't know anyone in this area, but perhaps there might be something for me at your farm. The man suddenly remembered that his family had just calculated to let go of a maid. Was this a sign, an opportunity to help a stranger? Perhaps Allah himself had led this woman to their home today. Jalil did not believe in coincidences. Everyone comes into our lives for a reason, apparent or hidden. Deciding to speak with his wife, he asked Teresa, Our family needs a maid, but we usually don't take in strangers. What can you tell us about yourself? Teresa paused for a moment. It was now or never. She also didn't believe in coincidences and decided to present herself in the best possible light. My name is Teresa. I am 24 years old. I have experience managing a household and I cook well. If you give me a chance, we might be able to help each other. As an experienced manager of several small enterprises, always dealing with people, he immediately sensed that Teresa was clearly a professional, intelligent, and educated. It was not in his rules to interrogate someone about how they ended up in difficult circumstances. They had already reached the gate. He would briefly explain the situation to Samia and suggest they try Teresa as a maid. Kareem was the first to respond to the knock on the door. He hurried to greet his father and was stunned. Next to Jalil stood such an unusual woman that he squinted to dispel this astounding vision. It was not customary in the family to ask too many questions of elders right at the doorstep. When the father decided, he would explain who the accompanying stranger was. The conversation with his wife was brief. The young woman surprisingly took an immediate liking to her. After showing the woman the room where she would live, the mistress of the house gathered everyone for dinner. They invited the new employee to the table to get to know everyone better. Samia liked that Teresa did not hide the fact that she was extremely hungry. It reminded her of a parable her father used to say, Remember, daughter, when you hire workers, seat them at the table first. Those who eat neatly and quickly will work diligently. Time confirmed the wisdom of these observations. Jalil and Samia never demeaned the dignity of their servants, who in turn repaid them with conscientious work and respect. Working for them was considered a stroke of luck. Teresa, as they say, fit right in. Within 2 weeks, the household could hardly imagine how they had ever gotten along without this affable woman. Diligent, tidy, requiring no reminders, she thought of everything. Samia sighed with relief. Jalil was happy that his wife was pleased. Quiet Egil began to confide in Teresa, consulting her about arranging her own wedding. Kareem kept silent. No one needed to know that he was enchanted by the new maid. His parents would not approve of his choice. After all, no one still knew where Teresa had come from or what had compelled her, as they understood, to leave the city. Teresa's story was shrouded in mystery, which in Kareem's eyes only added to her charm. For the first time, he had truly fallen in love with a completely unsuitable lady, but there was nothing he could do about it. He suffered in silence. No one must guess that he had decided to conduct his own investigation. Jalil was again hurrying to the stable, where his favorite had been left without field walks. Numerous times he had been asked to sell Diadema. Exorbitant amounts were offered for her unique color. Traders hoped to turn Jalil's gem into a common breeding mare, tirelessly producing offspring after offspring. Perhaps some of the foals would be born with the same silver stars against a bay background. That could indeed make one rich. Jalil was not tempted by any offers. Diadema was for him a family member, his friend, his joy, his solace. Do you sell your loved ones? The rest of his trio of Arabian horses also did not disappoint. He allowed his sons and Agol to ride them. Sometimes, as a treat, he organized horseback rides for guests at the house. Only Diadema remained solely his companion. And the horse paid him back with the same devoted love. Jalil was fond of the ancient legend that Arabian horses draw their strength and power from the wind, as if this breed of horse could drink the air's nectar, gaining grace and stature. He did not know if there was any truth to this statement, but he always tried to drive the quartet amid the steppes' wild grasses. Samia joked that if her husband was fed decently at the stable, he would never come home to sleep. Her words contained a grain of truth. The man again saddled Diadema. They went out of the yard, planning to have a good run in the fields. But then his phone rang. It was one of his partners, to whom Jalil's farms supplied meat products. He was talkative and very enthusiastic. "My friend Jalil, I have great news. Our Asian colleagues are interested in your products. Specifically, they are keen on canned goods with a long shelf life. I've been closely working with these partners for a while. What's the best way to arrange a personal meeting for you? Will you come to my office, or would you prefer to show them your production on site?" The opportunity to enter the international market had been Jalil's long-held dream. He devoted his time entirely to work when he was not at the stable. A contract with distant China and Laos would be a brilliant breakthrough for him. After a little thought, he decided to invite potential Asian partners not just to his farm's factories, but also to his home. Teresa was polishing mirrors in the grand hall. The cooks were conjuring magic in the kitchen. Samia and Agol were choosing outfits for the home reception while simultaneously overseeing the entire preparation process. Everything in the house had to shine with beauty and breathe cleanliness by the time the foreign guests arrived. They could not let Jalil down. The visit of the business Asians came at a somewhat inconvenient time. Preparations for Agol's wedding were already underway in the house. Jalil noticed that lately, his eldest son Kareem had become particularly pensive. He often drove to the city under various pretexts, constantly asking his father if there were any errands for him in the regional center. He returned even more morose. Jalil repeatedly noted to himself that he must have a serious conversation with his now fully grown firstborn to find out what was troubling him. But once again, farm business distracted him. He had returned to that thought again this morning. He decided to find out everything once the ordeal with the foreign guests was over. The prospective partners arrived at the house right on time. They were polite, conversing with Jalil in fluent and heartfelt English. The man occasionally felt embarrassed by his imperfect foreign language skills, but the guests reassuringly nodded that they understood everything perfectly. They promised to sign a long-term contract for regular product deliveries. They praised the hostesses and her assistants' skills in preparing such delicious and unusual dishes. Teresa didn't dare offer her help with translation. Who was she? Just a maid. Was it her place to meddle in her boss's business dealings? She only felt alarmed once, when she thought she heard one of the businessmen quietly say a few words to his colleague in the Miao language, thinking it was her imagination. "It's because I miss my grandmother, work, and the department. I'm imagining hearing familiar speech." The Miao language, spoken by perhaps no more than 4 million people across China, Laos, Vietnam, and the world, made it highly unlikely for two of its speakers to be in this house at the same time. One of them, as she understood from the host's conversation, was from Laos and the other from China. They told the host they represented two states interested in him. It all seemed too strange, too showy. Where China, Laos, and where, albeit large, private farms of the Jalil family. There was something suspicious about all this. Teresa felt danger in the air but couldn't quite explain what alarmed her. After several months living close to Andre, even her skin had learned to detect hints of negative energy. Now she felt a chill, uneasy. But who would listen to her? After dinner, Jalil offered to show the guests his famous stable with Arabian horses. The men clicked their tongues in approval, not expecting such an entertainment. Thinking the husband's future partners might get hungry on their walk in the fresh air, Samia, as a hospitable hostess, packed a basket of treats for them, but was a bit late. The guests and Jalil had already disappeared beyond the gate. Teresa was tasked with catching up to them to deliver the snacks and drinks. She quickly prepared herself. At the table, one of the guests had occasionally glanced at Teresa with interest, even addressing her in English, but she widened her eyes as if to say, "What are you saying? I completely don't understand." Now, outside the gate, the maid saw the following scene. Jalil was talking on his mobile phone a little further away. The Asian guests were lingering nearby, quietly conversing among themselves. Teresa boldly approached closer. The Asians continued their dialogue, treating the servant as an inconsequential presence. She was not mistaken. They spoke in the Miao language, using one of the dialects she knew well. It would have been too risky to drug everyone at once. I only incapacitated Samia. That foolish woman was always bustling about, running to the kitchen. I was sitting next to her, had access to her wine glass. She will feel sleepy within an hour. We will be at the stable by then. This simpleton Jalil is obsessed with his horses. No doubt the tour of his beloved stables will not be short. Are you sure he will leave us and rush home as soon as he finds out his wife shows no signs of life? Don't forget, I'm a trained psychiatrist. I carefully observed their silent communication at home, how they occasionally looked at each other, their gestures. These two are still in love. Between the stable and his wife, he will choose his beloved. The supposed representative from Laos nodded satisfactorily. This isn't your first operation involving horses. Are you absolutely sure that injecting the expensive mare won't harm her? Wouldn't it have been better to temporarily impair Diadema's condition with injections, making her uninteresting to Jalil, appearing hopelessly ill? We could have bought her from him for a pittance. The plan to now smuggle her out of the stable seems unrealistic. What if the livestock truck fails us? Are you sure you've bribed his groom, and he won't obstruct us? They abruptly fell silent when Jalil approached them, and Teresa was in shock. A paralyzing fear gripped her, as if she had seen a venomous snake about to bite her masters, and she wouldn't be able to save them in time. With an incredible act of will, the young woman gathered herself. She would not allow this crime to happen. She would save this family that had become dear to her. Handing Jalil the basket of light snacks and wine, Teresa quickly excused herself from the foreign guests and rushed into the house. Inside, everything was quiet and calm. Samia was watching some TV series, well aware that her husband would not be back soon. Egil was chatting on the phone with a friend. Kareem was at his computer in his room. Teresa didn't know whom to trust and ultimately chose the eldest son. She burst into his room like a whirlwind. She would have to confess that she was not really a housemaid but a foreign language teacher, reveal why she fled the city, what she had just overheard, and what doing so might mean for her own fate. Kareem was checking his emails when Teresa, like a storm, entered his room. The man was taken aback. Their maid had never behaved like this before. Could she have guessed his feelings and that he had hired a private detective to unravel the tangle of her past life? Kareem already knew that Teresa had run away from her husband and that he had a mistress. But was infidelity the reason for their maid's desperate act? For Eastern men, it's simpler. Call your wife, declare talak, which roughly translates to go away. You are now free and no longer my wife. And just like that, consider the divorce final. Formalities can be completed later. How do mulattoes marry and divorce? Kareem hadn't yet read up on that. He understood that his parents would hardly ever consent to him marrying a woman of a different faith, especially a married one. An impasse. Impossible relations. All these thoughts flashed through his mind as he observed Teresa. The woman seemed to want to say something to him and was again apprehensive. Then he decided to help her. "Teresa, what happened? Why are you not yourself?" And there was something so reassuring, promising support in his voice, that the maid burst out, "Kareem, we can't delay a minute. Call an ambulance immediately. Your mother's health is in great danger, and your father and the beautiful Diadema are also at risk." He believed her instantly. He made her describe the problem in detail while calling an ambulance for his mother. They both ran to the living room, where Samia was already nodding off in front of the TV, not understanding why she felt so drowsy. Teresa quickly dragged her into the bathroom, brought a kettle of water, and started making her drink as much as possible to flush her stomach. Samia was very lethargic and resisted. Water dripped down her chin. The house mistress kept trying to pass out. Kareem called Agal for help. He briefly explained to her, without going into details, that their mother had been poisoned. He called the cook to urgently run to the stable to Jalil. His father's phone went unanswered. Kareem feared that the Asian guests had gone further than they had intended. Just in case, he also called the police. Teresa was terrified. But now her peaceful life in this cozy Eastern mansion was over. She would have to show her passport to the authorities. If she was wanted, Andre would soon appear. She was certain that her tyrannical husband would seek revenge for her audacious escape more fiercely than before. But ultimately, none of that mattered anymore. She had to repay these people's kindness with kindness. And it didn't matter that her own life would spiral downward again afterward. She was ready for it. The police and ambulance arrived just in time. Samia was saved, despite the overdose of the sleeping drug being dangerously high. If it weren't for Teresa, it would have ended tragically. After Teresa left the stable, events did not unfold according to the criminal's plan. The groom couldn't betray Jalil, not even for a fabulous sum of money. He reasoned that the criminals would leave, but he would have to live with the pain of Jalil's grief. And he genuinely loved the horses. He couldn't muster the cruelty to harm Diadema. When Jalil brought the guests for a tour, his employee managed to whisper to him what was happening, and no call came from home about the family feeling ill. By the time the police arrived, Jalil and his groom had already managed to subdue the slim lovers of fortune themselves. Now both speakers of the Miao language, which turned out to be a pure coincidence, had to face the full severity of local laws. Samia was not in the hospital for long. Doctors managed to get her back on her feet quickly. They assured there would be no lasting effects from the severe intoxication, to the great relief of Jalil and the entire family. The police only casually asked for Teresa's passport when taking her witness statement. Now, she still had to appear in court for this matter and for that, return to the city. She was very much looking forward to this moment. She couldn't always hide the harsh truth of her marriage from her grandmother. It was time to explain things to her. During all this time, Teresa had sent only one message from the cook's phone to the elderly woman, informing her that she was all right and that she should not be looked for yet. All would be explained later. The Asians were shocked that a simple maid in the middle of nowhere understood one of the most complex dialects of the Miao language. Teresa had absolutely no idea how Andre would react to her disappearance. He wasn't upset or distressed, he was relieved. He thought his increasingly annoying wife would go to her grandmother to heal her wounds, and he would be free. For himself, he had already resolved that he would divorce her. He only promised himself that this time he would punish his wife especially inventively as a lesson for her defiance to last a lifetime. But now, he was not concerned with that. The amount of his quick loan had already doubled due to interest, and that was not the limit. He went to the loan company's office to beg for a delay of a few weeks. He found Teresa's gold jewelry, given by her parents and grandmother before the wedding. In her haste, she hadn't taken it with her. but the money from their sale was a drop in the bucket. Despite all this, he was growing more attached to his greedy mistress. Parting with this mercenary woman was beyond his strength. After the events at Jalil's house, Teresa told everyone the full truth about herself. They were deeply moved by the cruelty she had faced. Jalil himself did not expect to go against his principles. No joke? He began teaching Teresa how to ride. But that wasn't the novel part. He was so grateful that she had saved his wife that he allowed the poor woman closer to Diadema. The beautiful mare herself nudged him toward this decision. Once, when Teresa brought Jalil lunch to the stable, his favorite began to show unease, as if she wanted to tell him something. Neither the owner nor the groom could decipher the meaning of her anxiety. The horse calmed down only when Teresa approached the far enclosure. Jalil watched this scene in amazement. Diadema stretched her muzzle towards the woman, trying to rub her nose against Teresa's hand, happily shuffling her feet. Jalil took this as a sign. Diadema wanted to get to know Teresa better. His heart stirred. So be it. At the police station, they managed to get the Asian fraudsters to talk. They were still in a daze, unable to believe that this time they had met their defeat. Both were part of an international ring that specialized only in stealing elite horse breeds on demand. Diadema had long disturbed one of the gang's regular clients, who had promised a huge sum for her. Anyone familiar with the horse world would understand the value of a mare with such a rare, unique coloration. Jalil, Samia, Kareem, and Teresa went to the city together for the court sessions. The criminals were given substantial sentences. Both glared at Teresa through the bars of their cell with undisguised hatred, especially when she took the stand to testify. Seeing the fear in her eyes, Kareem touched her hand for the first time openly. "Don't be afraid, I'm here with you." Suddenly, she felt much calmer, somewhat warmer. She was fond of this young man, who was nothing like Andre even in his sweetest moments of courtship. Her husband had always admired only himself. Kareem knew how to find the good in everything around him, creating pleasant moments from little things. Now, after the trial, he suggested to his parents that they go home, and he would stay with Teresa to accompany her to her grandmother's. Teresa was overjoyed. She could not have dreamed of such an opportunity. This gesture was more precious to her than any diamonds. At the university department, everyone welcomed Teresa as one of their own, asking where she had been, eager to embrace her or at least shake her hand. She could not have imagined feeling so overwhelmed with happiness, having the chance to see her colleagues again. She quickly told her grandmother about her troubles. Below, in the car, Kareem was waiting. It was awkward to waste his time unnecessarily. The elderly woman puzzled her granddaughter by mentioning that Andre had not appeared, clearly not searching for his wife. She kept asking Teresa, "What didn't work out for you too? You talk about divorce, but he doesn't care where his wife has disappeared." Teresa did not tell her about the horrors of her life with her husband. The bruises and scratches had long healed, and slowly her soul was thawing. Her bitter marriage experience taught her a lifelong lesson. People can appear and be very different. Jalil and Samia's home had somehow naturally become her home too. Soon there would be Egil's wedding, and perhaps later, Kareem would find a bride. At this thought, something painfully pinched her heart. But Teresa dismissed it as benign envy. She thought, someone will be lucky to have such a wonderful man, and even if his parents' house is governed by Eastern rules, if you love someone, you become their joy and support. I could certainly embrace a foreign religious faith and traditions. Egil's wedding was heartfelt. Before the banquet, Teresa participated in a sort of bachelorette party for the first time. The bride called it the night of henna. The maid, now living almost as a family member, explained that it was a tribute to ancient rituals. They laughed with Egil's friends as they applied so-called mendi, henna designs, to the girls' hands, weaving the groom's initials into the intricate patterns. The trick was that the future husband had to find his initials on their wedding night. After this ritual, Teresa thought sadly, my own wedding was quite different. There was no zest, no lightness. May my friend Egil never know such hardships. May she be happy. At the famous Nika, an old ritual, Teresa, as someone of a different faith, could not attend. She accepted this fact with full understanding. But she did make it to the festive, grand banquet and had a great time with the other women. Jalil and Samia did not separate guests by gender in the halls. They held more modern views on such matters. Today, there was room for everyone in their home. Everyone was welcome. Only Kareem was sad. His secret infatuation with Teresa had developed into a deeper feeling. Now was not the right time to confess to his parents that he wanted a real, honest wedding with Teresa, with all the traditional stages and matchmaking. How would his family view this? The man did not know the answer to this question and feared this conversation with Jalil. He already knew the story of Teresa's marriage, knew that her passport still bore the stamp of her legal bond, and that she was technically not a free woman. He ardently wished to amend her fate, to show her that a husband could be different, loving, attentive, genuinely tender. Could he convince this unfortunate woman that with him she would be happy and forever forget her past experiences? A few days ago, Kareem received the final report from a private investigator about Andre's escapades. Andre was completely entangled in his debts, openly living with a mistress who continued to have insatiable appetites. Everything in Andre's life was hanging by a thread, and only a miracle could save him now. Kareem bought out his debt on the condition that Andre would immediately file for divorce and disappear from Teresa's life forever. During the conversation with Kareem, Andre quickly caved in, muttering through clenched teeth, "What do you care about this already damaged goods? You're paying such money for her. Do you have a personal interest in her? I never thought anyone would want that dark-skinned woman." Kareem silenced Andre with just a look. He didn't want to sully his hands dealing with such a contemptible person. He kept his actions a secret. He used his own savings for the buyout, not asking his parents for help. His savings would also cover wedding expenses, though he was not entirely sure everything would work out. Once Egel's important days were over, he planned to speak with his parents and Teresa. He would turn 28 next month. He was an adult, an independent man. Hadn't their family sometimes broken the rules? If not, he would be the first. He needed no one else. He had made up his mind that Teresa would be his wife. Their maid had no idea about the turmoil in the head of the homeowner's eldest son. What consumed her at the moment was a burning desire to escape the wedding festivities and asked Jalil if she could ride Diadema. When she galloped on the magical horse, she always remembered the legend about Arabian steeds, how they were energized by the steppe winds. She missed that intoxicating rush of adrenaline. Unexpectedly, Jalil easily allowed her to ride Diadema, but on one condition: Kareem would accompany her. It was inappropriate for a woman to be alone in the steppe in the evening. He called his son over, giving him the task. "You will go horseback riding with Teresa. We owe this woman a lot, and I want to fulfill this small whim of hers. Be her protector and guard." Jalil smiled at his son and added, "You would be the last coward if you can't express your feelings to the woman you love while I give you this chance." Kareem blushed and then turned pale. "Father, how did you guess? I've tried so hard to hide my feelings." Jalil patted his eldest son on the shoulder. "Your mother and I have long suspected that you chose her, and we will not stand in your way. We fully approve of your decision. We are sure your intentions are serious. Sometimes, it's all right to break family traditions for a worthy woman. Teresa is indeed one of those rare beings. Hurry up, son, she's already past the gate. Now, it's all in your hands." Kareem couldn't believe how a grown, independent man could suddenly feel like a little boy again, the kind who just had a punishment canceled by his parents, and then given a gift, a personal happiness placed in his palm. He almost skipped as he ran to catch up with Teresa, mentally promising everyone that within a year, they would be celebrating another wedding in this house. And why do they say happiness loves silence? He was ready to shout his news across the steppe. But first, he would promise all this to Teresa. Jalil soothingly patted Diadema, gently promising, "Don't worry, my dear, soon you will be relieved of your burden." We will be flying across the steppe again, chasing the wind. Right now, you are too heavy, darling, we shouldn't take any risks. The man glanced at his watch, ruefully thinking about how he would again catch it from his wife. Responsibilities at home had increased, they were aging, and she couldn't always manage on her own. Moreover, they hadn't been able to find a second maid quite like Teresa. His wife constantly grumbled that they shouldn't have separated the sons into different homes. She missed them, and even Egil, who was expecting her second child, couldn't always visit. The only consolation was that Kareem and Teresa remained under the parental roof. After having twins last year, they declared they would take a year or a year and a half break with the kids. The grandchildren were strong, dark, curly-haired little rascals, keeping all the adults on their toes. Recently, Teresa's parents visited from Zimbabwe for the first time in many years. Teresa didn't tell them how steep and winding her path to family happiness had been. There was no point in worrying her aging parents. She spoke a little with her father in Shona and, with a mysterious smile, told her mother that she had been right. Nothing in our lives is coincidental. Another rare language, meow, had paved her way to happiness. Arriving home from the stable, Jalil found Samia in great spirits. She whispered to him that there was news. Kareem and Teresa are expecting again. She personally hoped that this time it would be a granddaughter, resembling everyone at once. After all, the blood of the one you love with all your heart doesn't matter. What matters is their soul. That, surely, needs no explanation. Jalil thought about how soon Diadema too would bring new life to the stable. It didn't matter if the foal wouldn't have the silver speckles mixed with bay. As long as he too could one day race across the steppe and drink the wind of freedom and happiness, such a chance is vital for all living beings on this earth.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.